Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Hitting with Holly. Todd Hollandsworth, and I'm Joe Frisaro, and we're just going to kind of keep this ball rolling and the momentum that we've built the last few weeks as we've launched Hitting with Holly. It's an exciting time right now for the baseball season. The All-Star break's about to happen. For Major League Baseball, travel season's in full swing, and Holly will jump in and talk a little bit about his personal experiences and offer some advice, and we'll dive into some things, as players are getting closer to being drafted, what they should look out for. And we're going to talk a little bit about some advice for guys and gals who are switch hitters, and offer some insights, some tips here in this episode. Holly, welcome. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, Joe. So good to be with you. So fun to talk baseball. We're kind of at the height of the baseball season. Not that we kind of, go down the slope, but I mean, Major League Baseball, you've got the All-Star break going on. Kids are out playing travel ball. You've probably got 2 or 3 tournaments left, and then you've got some big showcase tournaments that come up here later. But we're kind of right there in that grind at least for the kids anyway, where they've done their high school season. Now they've entered into their summer ball season, and they're at least halfway through it, or probably even a little bit farther past it. So, this is where you got to dig deep. This is where you got to grind. This is what we used to say in the big leagues all the time. You got to find yourself, catch your breath a little bit, and just continue to push.
No doubt. And I did kind of want to talk about that. We can start off with this topic of when to kind of put the brakes on it, because it's easy, especially for us here in Florida. And I know you're going out of state a lot with your son, Trey, who's playing 15U right now. And kind of the mindset is to keep going, keep playing. It's fun to go to these tournaments. You want to see, different parts of the country, meet new players, new people. I get it. And for parents and the players, it's exciting time. But for many, they just came off anywhere from a 25 to 40 or so game high school season. If your team's fortunate enough to go to the playoffs, your high school season pushes as much as to 30, maybe 32 games here in Florida, almost 50 in other states. And then many of your kids just jump right in the travel ball. So how do you kind of measure too much, obviously, with your son, Trey, but then also a little bit of advice for parents who are really kind of pushing the envelope? We're up there 80, 90, 100 games right now.
Well, I'll say this, and of course, this is my opinion. And I'm a guy. I'm 51 now, so I'm a guy who was drafted out of high school, loved the game of baseball, couldn't play enough of it as a kid. I played other sports as well, played football and basketball. Loved the game, loved the minor leagues, loved the big leagues, loved talking about the game, loved being around the game. But I also started to understand, really through probably a little bit more of my big league career, what burnout was. And, I hear it sometimes from kids, and I think that truly has become the key for me, is understanding that. As a child, for me, I couldn't wait to get to the end of the baseball season, even in high school and even younger, because I knew football was right around the corner, and I loved football so much. So the thing that this is going to contradict what everybody else out there is probably telling you, and what they think the world is telling them in this baseball world. But I love athletes that play multiple sports. And the reason I say that, and the reason I really do continue to support it for everybody, I heard my son Trey say it to me just last week. And what it was telling me was, it's the message behind the message. Dad, I'm really excited for football season. And of course, what he's saying to me is, we played a lot of baseball. We've been doing this for a long time. It's time to take a break. And I'm a huge advocate for taking a break. And the reason I say that is, this game is incredibly difficult. And for a kid to think that he's got to play baseball 365 days a year, go through the summer, go through the fall, start it back up again, and love a sport so much because you played it every day, I find it almost unbelievable to think that that's even possible. So I love to see kids that are playing other sports. You don't have to be a 3-sport athlete. Sometimes you can just be a 2-sport athlete. But I learned a lot about myself, and I learned a lot about baseball through football, through basketball. Baseball is a very individualized sport. We call it a team concept. We go on the field together, we defend together, we pitch. But when you kind of look at the game itself, it's very isolating. The actions around the ball, whether the pitcher holds it, whether the hitter's trying to hit it, whether you're on the base trying to do something in between, there is a very strong individual side to our sport that you continue to work on and that you continue to harness your skills. but the team concept and the idea of competing as a team for me was really learned through other sports. And so I find it very valuable and vital almost to say that kids should be playing other sports as well. And I think that's a good marker. I've never been I have my oldest, Ty, when we got to Florida after moving away from Illinois, when we were in Chicago, had said to me, Dad, everybody down here plays baseball 365. I'm like, all right, well, listen, you got to make a decision. So he was going to give up football, and he did. He got to his senior year, and he was like, Dad, I regret that I gave up football. I should have been playing both all along. I love baseball. It's everything to me, and he still plays it to this day in college. But he was like, I should have kept playing football. It taught me a lot. And of course, my Tug has did some of the same things where he kind of got in and got out of football as well. And he also has said, I'm really glad that I stayed with football. And of course, Trey earlier this year said to me, Dad, I'm all in, pushing all the chips in. Of course, Trey's 15 years old. I'm putting all the chips in on baseball. I'm in. And I said, Trey, and of course, his older brothers were like, don't do that. Don't think that way yet. So he said, Trey, just, relax, think about it for a little bit. And if you want to, play baseball 365, of course, as your parents and as your family, we love you and we're going to support you, whatever you choose to do. And just last week, he said to me, Dad, I'm ready for football. And so it tells you how these kids think. And a lot of times that messaging is coming down from the parents. It's coming down from the coach. It's coming down from the programs that they're in. If you're not playing baseball 365 days a year, you've got no chance of making it. That's a lie. That's not true at all.
Yeah. Do you see a cutoff point, though? Do you see your senior year? I mean, obviously, excuse me, if you could take it to the next level, you may need to give up one.
Of course. I mean, why wouldn't we just allow that to decide itself? And that's the thing. I mean, there was a day, and I loved football. I was convinced, even as a senior in high school way back in the early 90s, that if I was going to go to college, that I was going to play both football and baseball. And I had the opportunity to do just that. But the reality was that was going to be very hard to pull off. And of course, I ended up getting drafted and going in the draft. So that became easy for me to understand, like, okay, this is where the Lord's leading me. God's taking me here. I'm going to go play baseball. And I didn't mind doing 136 games that year of baseball, which all of a sudden was like, wow, that's a huge number. Think about that, kids. 136 games. And, right after doing, just the high school and summer thing where you're probably playing 70. So I doubled my number right away, and there was no more football. But my heart was all in it. And as you get older, that decision gets easier to make. And I think that you'll start to see what sport you're really, really good at, and obviously what doors are opening for you and what doors are closing. And if those doors continue to open, well, then obviously you're going to continue to pursue it. But when you commit yourself to something that at 365 days a year, at the age of 14, 15, 16 years old, for me to say that your heart is going to be completely in it, that all of your emotions, all of your soul, everything that you think is going to be all in at baseball at that early age is very hard for me to believe. Because I see it in my kids' eyes today. They're curious. They love other sports. They love being parts of teams. And there's other things that other sports teach you that baseball just doesn't teach you that actually help you in baseball. So I'm a huge advocate for playing multiple sports. Plus, I think that that's a lot of times where, good baseball players who are incredibly athletic, typically most of them did other things. And that's where that athleticism comes from, is that they learned how to play other sports. And then they brought it back to baseball when baseball chose them, so to speak, as they got a little bit older.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's kind of funny because I've kind of been a single-minded person and doing 18 years on the Marlins beat for MLB.com. And, you kind of at that point. But even then, I picked up that beat when I was like 40 years old or 42 years old. And I covered 10 Super Bowls in my career at newspapers, right, and Stanley Cup championships in the past, and NBA and colleges and high schools. And now what I'm doing, I'm enjoying for SB Live, Scorebook Live, which I do my writing for, my freelance writing, high school football season. I started doing that a couple of years ago, and I enjoy that as a break. So we're going to kind of implement that as we get to the fall months and continue doing this. But we're going to incorporate some football talk and dual sports, and I'll have videos of high school football on the channel. Still, the lane is baseball, obviously, but some of the players that are playing football are dual sport players. So it'll be a good little break and something more fun to talk about. And we'll make connections, similarities, and how football helps you. And Holly, and for our audience, if they don't know, I covered the Marlins for a long, long time. Holly was obviously played for the Marlins and was there a broadcaster, and a good friend of ours, former Marlin, JT Realmuto, who happened to be like an all-state quarterback in
Right.
Oklahoma. And he basically, had an Oklahoma State opportunity, I think dual sport even. And Stan Meek, who drafted JT, and I talked to JT about this as well. But Stan said one of the things that caught him leading up to drafting JT was he saw JT in the fall basically do the what do they call it, the wildcat, where he just snapped to the quarterback and he'd run down the field. Like it was like basically he wildcat like 80-yard 2-minute drill to lead his team into the state championship or to the won it all or whatever. But JT was just such a gamer. And then how he got discovered on the baseball field, because Stan saw him and knew what he brought competitively, leadership wise, athletically. And then he sees him in baseball, and Stan tells the story that he happened to go to a high school game that Realmuto is there. And what a game this would have been to go to. The pitcher on the opposing team was Michael Fuller, who was at one point the rookie of the year for the Detroit Tigers.
Right.
The shortstop of that team Fuller was a guy named Brian Anderson, who went to Arkansas and was the Marlins third baseman, eventually became JT's teammate. And still, I think Andy's dealt with some injuries lately. I think he's in the minor leagues right now. But Brian Anderson, we know him very well. And JT is playing them. And well, what happens is JT's their shortstop and closer, basically, because he threw hard and he was a bulldog. He would get the seventh inning in a save situation. But their catcher or their starting pitcher was hurt. The catcher had a pitch. And the coach tells Stan, who was the only scout there that time, that they said, "Hey, look, I know you're here to see JT, but he's got a catch for me today because I don't have, just a scenario I painted for you. Our pitcher's down, our catcher's got a pitch, and JT's got a catch. He's never done it. We don't know how it's going to look, but, he said he'd give it a whirl." Well, like in the first inning, JT shows flashes of a pop time and throws a guy out. Then he comes up. First at bat off Michael Fuller, hits it over the batter's eye for a home run. Second at bat, hits a ground ball to short, nearly beats it out and runs like a 3-5 down the line, whatever it was. Right. Probably look, but Stan's got to watch. And Stan saw enough. He said, yeah, there's some footwork that was a little rusty with Realmuto, but he caught a game where he said, this kid may be a catcher. And so he basically he went back, he told the rest of the Marlins area scouts, we are not going back to watch JT Realmuto the rest of the year. But one last thing Stan did was after, a day or so afterwards, he walked over to the football field and he talked to the football coach to get character background on Realmuto to see how it jived up with talking to the baseball coach. So Stan was doing his homework. Rest is history. The Marlins take Realmuto out in the third round that year. And he was listed, and I remember because I was covering that draft, as a shortstop/catcher.
Right.
And then those calls, it was, Realmuto, we think he can pull this off. He's athletic enough. He's this or that. But, we're going to look at him a catcher. Rest is history. He's a perennial all-star, basically, and arguably the best catcher of the last 8 to 10 years.
Well, that's
just a quick story.
Well, no, and I mean, you make so many great points, and you really do drive home my point as well, which is the development, the athleticism that JT played with. I said, if you ask anybody around the game today, some of the great characteristics of JT, and it really is the complete package. And that's what is so much fun to talk about. That complete package wasn't developed by committing himself to something, from start to finish and just not doing anything else, only baseball. No, he played multiple sports. He understands leadership. He understands integrity, and he understands how a team works together, how an offense in football works together, how to be a leader. He's now a catcher. So like you see all of those things factored into what he became as a catcher. JT wasn't a one-dimensional catcher. That's what everybody fell in love with him as a player. It's what the Philadelphia Phillies fans fall in love with. This is a guy who's You talked pop time. You talked arm strength. You talked foot speed. That was the one thing when we had JT in Miami that I loved when I was covering him, was that he wasn't this slow-footed, big catcher that we kind of all get used to seeing, that had a little bit of power in his bat. He was as likely to hit a triple as anybody else in the lineup. I remember a guy named Jason Kendall. It was a good friend of mine way back in the day. Jason, I mean, it's what we kind of appreciated in Jason. Now, Jason didn't have a tremendous amount of power, but he did so many things well. He was a good captain. He was a good team leader, but he had great foot speed. He was actually known for stealing bases and for being a 300 hitter. I mean, he had a great career, and he's done many things throughout his career, and of course understands the game very well. Was also not just a guy who was like baseball all the time, 365 days a year as a child. Yeah. And so, you really are driving home that point. I know that there are guys, and they certainly exist, that just played one sport and they go all the way through. I guess for me, I find that the common denominator for most guys that I saw at the big league level, certainly from our country, maybe not, when we expand the conversation and go a little bit more international, maybe it changes a little bit. But most kids over here that people fall in love with, even at the major league level, you'll always find out that there's a story that they'll tell you about their high school football career or their high school basketball career or soccer or something else, maybe even golf, but something else that had their attention during their youth years that helped them become the baseball player that they are. It's just very hard, I think, for a child to fall in love with something and maintain that love affair that you really, I feel, I'll call it passion, that you want to play with each and every day. When you get to the big leagues, it's 162 games. You better love it because you're going to play an awful lot of it. So that's kind of my point, that when you're at an age right now and you've got the ability, if you so choose, to go out there and learn other things that will actually help you be a better baseball player, why wouldn't you do it? Plus, you need a mental break from this game. It's so hard. It's such a challenge, even for these young kids competing at such a high level at such an early age, that getting involved in something like a team sport, even like football, which is, obviously the next season coming up for most kids, that it's going to help them be better, take a break from baseball.
Yeah, excellent points. And it kind of leads into the next topic I want to kind of get in, Holly, is because I really kind of focused it on it in the baseball season. How about the dual position baseball player, the pitcher position player, baseball player? We see a lot of players like that. We've seen players who project more as a pitcher get hurt hitting, or vice versa. Someone who kind of looks like they're ultimately have to make the decision to be a pitcher gets hurt, in the field. When do you keep, when do you pump the brakes on that, or say, look, I got to give something up?
Well, again, I think that baseball always has a way of deciding for you what you're ultimately going to be. And I was a Dodger coming up. Now I'm left-handed, so I was already limited defensively, right? So I can only play left field, center field, right field, and first base. Couldn't play anywhere else on the field. As the Dodgers were raising me, coming through the system as an 18-year-old, I went to A-ball my first year. As an 18-year-old, I had a good arm. I was a right fielder. Interestingly enough, the following season, they put me in center field. They said, Todd, Holly, you're going to play center field in the California League. You're playing center field all year. You're not going to play another position. The following year, I got to AA. They said, you're playing left field all year. And I kept thinking, okay, well, what am I? And they were like, don't worry about that. Just do what you're told. And I'm like, okay, I'm in. I was playing every day, obviously, and doing my 137. I think that was the number in the minor leagues at the time. So I was getting 137 games, but they're like, you're going to be a left fielder. And then when I got back to AAA, they're like, okay, now we're moving you back to right field again. It was so interesting. And I never really did touch first base until I got into my big league career. And that's actually, I did play, I think, 9 or 10 games at first base in the big leagues, but they taught me that as we were moving along. And when they needed it, they were going to teach it to me. And I learned it at the big league level. But my point in telling that story is just this. They were already preparing me for all the outfield positions. I didn't understand it at the time because I said, I want to define myself as a center fielder. It's the marquee outfield position. I can handle it. Yeah. I do it. I feel like I do it pretty well. And this is what I should be. Well, they were like, yeah, you are. You're not saying the wrong things, but we want you to be. We want you to have 150 games in left. We want you to have 150 games in right, so that we have the flexibility to use you the way that we need to use you at the major league level, because we don't know what we're going to do in free agency. We don't know who we're going to sign. And of course, we're projecting down the road. But their whole plan all along was to prepare me for what I could possibly do. Now, throughout my career, the majority of my games came in left field. But I had about 200 games in center field, and I had probably just as many or close to just as many in right. And that was with other organizations as well, not just the Los Angeles Dodgers. And so there's my point. Kids should embrace this. Kids should take on the challenge of playing multiple positions. Even if they find that they're really good at one and maybe not so good at another, it's always to your benefit to have a different perspective. And this is where I would jump in on the pitcher only nonsense that I can barely stand. These kids who have already convinced themselves at the ripe old age of 14, 15, and 16, well, I can only pitch. No, you should probably play some first base. Maybe you're not a shortstop, but you definitely need to see the game from the other side. And it benefits you to see the game from the other side. Even if you're not that good at it, there's always something to be learned about how hitters think, or about how defenders think, or how, it is to be out there and be involved from start to finish. I said, one of the tragedies of travel ball is that, these kids will fly in and they'll pitch and then they'll leave. And it's like, okay, the only thing you're ever going to know is pitching. Wouldn't you just love to know a little bit more if you just hung around and stayed with the team, maybe pitched your game, your 6 or 7 innings, meet your quota, 75, 100 pitches or whatever it was, but actually got a game or two as a first baseman or as a right fielder and got a couple of at-bats and actually worked at it? It would absolutely benefit you to understand the wholeness of the game. We've already gotten to a point in our lives in baseball, which kind of breaks my heart, is that we're already starting to separate out pitchers and players at the ripe old age of 14 and 15 years old. And I think that's an absolute tragedy. When I was 12 years old, I played shortstop. Remember, I told you I'm left-handed, but I wanted to play shortstop because I wanted the perspective of the shortstop. Now, I had the foot speed and I had the arm strength, but I didn't have the angles. So I knew I had to be quicker. And it was like, even my coach at the time who was willing to teach it to me, showed me what I needed to do to be okay or get through as a left-handed shortstop. So I did that when I was 12 years old. And of course, I never did it again, but it gave me a perspective of how infielders think, how they work, how quick they have to be, and how they see the ball so differently than the outfielder. But it benefited me. So baseball is a sport that you have to just sponge. You have to absorb it. And you have to kind of take in everything that goes on the field to have a better perspective. And even as a player and as an outfielder in my major league career, there were so many benefits of learning just the other positions, learning how the pitchers thought, getting up on the mound every now and again myself and understanding how this works and how much I didn't like pitching, but how it worked and how they think. So those are all things that are going to benefit players. Yes, there's a time and a place where our body starts to slow down a little bit and we get to the end of the journey. And I'm talking just in the season where we have to slow it down, but get in as much as you possibly can get while you've got your 40 or 50 games. Get the most out of it. Don't just tell yourself, okay, well, listen, I'm throwing 85 miles an hour and I'm 15, 16 years old and I'm already getting scouted and this is the only thing I'm going to do for the rest of my life. We have a couple of kids on Trey's team who I love them dearly. Like they're a couple of our better pitchers and they both play shortstop and second base and they stay for the entire tournament. They don't just fly in, pitch and leave like so many kids we see do. They actually stick around, and after they make their start, they play shortstop, and then they'll switch, and one will go to second base, and they just learn so much about the game and the other side of the ball, which they'd be the first ones to tell me. Why I'm so good at pitching is because I'm playing. I know what hitters are now starting to think because I'm thinking those same thoughts. I'm thinking those same things when I'm playing shortstop or I'm playing second base, and I'm trying to get myself out, so to speak.
No, those are great points. And that's conversations I have with young players too, is I'm always asking them to think. I think the thinking part and seeing, like I tell young hitters that, how's that guy pitching you? Or what were you looking to do? And even the other day I was out at American Heritage recording and meeting with some of their players there, and they're doing batting practice, and we're just kind of very, very casual. But before they started one of their rounds, I said, hey, let me just, before we get going, I said, what are you trying to do in this round? And they said they're both left-handed hitters and both very good players. And their videos are up on the site. They said, well, in this, I'm trying to go middle of the field and left center. So it's okay. It's at least it's something. You're not just going up there to see ball and try to hit as far as I can. And
Right.
then one doing the same approach, and I actually angled behind home plate and was videoing there. Left-handed pitcher too. Throwing the BP. Even though he's working that middle away, there was a pitch that he can drive that was kind of like middle in, and he turned and smoked it. If it was in the game, it would have been into the gap in the right center. And after the round, I made a mental note and I went back. I kind of knew where I had in the recording. I said to him, I said, you know what I like you did in this round? And I went back. I said, look at the video here. I said, you're doing what you said you're going to do. You're going to go middle away, but you got a pitch you absolutely can drive. And instead of looking to go middle away with that, you did what your instincts told you to do, crush it. Because I said, if you're only like right,
Right.
tell me if I'm wrong. Like, if you got a chance that you didn't have a whole round of that, but if you're taking 20 swings and that's the one swing you laid it out, well, that was the pitch to hit, and you did. If you're not ever hitting the pitch you can hit, then you're not accomplishing that either. So
Right.
I was happy that he did that.
You teach yourself, even in your batting practice, even in your simulated games that you do during the springtime, and all the things that you're learning as a hitter. Um, all of those things are, 100% the truth. You're absolutely right. Like, you got to look at every day as a kid and say, what am I going to learn today about this game? And even today, I've been around the sport my whole life, and I'm always learning something. I learned from my kids, my two older sons in college, even from Trey. I hear things and we talk, and you'll learn things about leads, and you'll learn things about pitch selection, and how he was Trey had convinced himself this kid was going to throw a curveball 2-0, and he looked for it and he sat on it, and all of a sudden he hits a rocket into the gap. And you're like, how could you possibly be sitting on this pitch? He goes, Dad, I was watching him warm up, and I've been watching. Every time he would fall behind, he would throw a curveball. I mean, he's picking up on all this stuff. Those are the key ingredients. That's exactly how this game works. You have to watch it with intent. You have to play it with intent. You have to play it with purpose, and it does require a lot of mental energy during the course of the day. But to your point about the swing, when you're game planning exactly what you're talking about, even in your batting practices, you're going out there to look to execute something. You're not just going up there with your brain turned off and swinging the bat, for the fence every time. You're teaching yourself things. How do I keep this ball fair? How do I keep my hands inside the baseball if I'm thinking about going the other way and he challenges me in with a fastball? You realize it's just an extension of your swing, and you get your foot down a little bit faster. The swing doesn't change. We tend to have the same swing all over the strike zone. It's just a question of when we actually execute that swing and stay on plane so that we can drive it, from foul pole to foul pole. And that's ultimately what we're looking to do. So it's always good to hear kids talking that conversation. And I am, and for coaches out there, encourage your kids when they're thinking the game, even if the thought itself might be incorrect. Encourage the process. That is absolutely vital to young kids today, is that they're thinking the game. The thoughts may not always be correct, and the sequencing in their mind, sometimes there has to be some adjustment, but generally we learn from the game of baseball through trial and error. And that's the best tool to learn how this game. This is what works for me. These are what pitches I hit really, really well. These are what pitches I don't hit really, really well. And you start to understand, and you say to yourself, okay, well, if I don't handle low and away very well, which most hitters don't, why would I ever go up there looking for it? What am I working back to get to my strengths? And that's what you do as a hitter. And so it's always great to hear hitters talk like that. But again, coaches, encourage your players when they're thinking. That's where they get the pat on the back. That's where you got to love them and tell them, listen, you're on the right path. You're thinking the game the right way. Let's tweak it a little bit. Maybe we get it lined up a little bit more correctly, or maybe there's a little bit better way of doing it. But you need for them to keep thinking this game.
Yeah, and then we're getting almost out of time. We don't like to push these too late. But one thing we want to wrap up, because our good friend Dave D'Agostino, who we do our audio podcast on Real Voice of the Game, their son Tanner is a switch hitter, and we talked a little bit about it on our audio podcast. What advice do you have for kids, especially the young kids switch hitting? How do you balance it evenly? Obviously, what do you do mentally if you're slumping on one side and performing the other, or vice versa?
Well, here's the one thing that I learned from the guys that I played with. Now, I'm not a switch hitter. I'm just 100% lefty. There's not anything I could really do right-handed very, very well. maybe as I've gotten a little bit older, my right side's gotten a little bit stronger. But everything I do is left-handed. But I did hang out with an awful lot of switch hitters and guys who are really good at it. And one thing that I always kind of learned from them was this, that my right-handed swing is nothing like my left-handed swing. And that's almost always the case. I say this all the time. Our personalities come out in our swing, and they do. And when you've got the ability to do it from both sides of the plate, you're going to have different types of personality, and I get it. And so it may look different. But what you learn about it is that you have to work at it. I remember talking to Chipper Jones about it a little bit when we were in Atlanta. And if you guys remember Chipper Jones, Chipper had two very distinct swings. And he would always say that, yeah, I need to work on my right-handed swing a little bit more than my left-handed swing. Really, it was just based on the fact that he was doing more left-handed hitting throughout the course of the year because, of course, there's more right-handed people. So with that being said, he always kind of saw it. I would see him on days. There would be, certain days where we would be facing, a right-handed pitcher, and I would we would be in batting practice or whatever, and he would still take batting practice right-handed. His mindset was everything that he does left-handed, he wanted to make sure that he was doing right-handed. It doesn't just become I'm going to work more on my left-handed swing because I'm going to do this a lot more, and I don't have to work on my right-handed swing nearly as much. You have to work on them equally and balance that out. But again, this goes into effort and the grind, as we call it, the swings in the cage, understanding how your body works. Every switch hitter used to say that to me all the time, Joe, which I think is so interesting. Very rarely would they ever tell you I have both swings working at the same time. And that was kind of a thing. You would get the repetition, even if you were a good right-handed hitter, or maybe that was your natural side. You would get into these zones where this side's working really, really well, and the other side might not be working so much. So it always felt like it was a work in progress, but every one of them always expressed the same thing to me. They enjoyed the process because they never felt like they were at the pinnacle of everything working all the time. And that's the game of baseball. Even when you're at your absolute best, even when you're on that stretch where you're like, I'm 7 for my last 9, I'm seeing everything. The way your mind tends to work is I can still be better at something in this game, and I'm constantly working at it. I mean, I got to the end of my career and I was like, I felt like I was still learning things from people. Larry Walker was still teaching me tricks in the outfield as I got later into my career, and learning things from Ken Griffey Jr. when I got to Cincinnati. Just little things here and there that you kind of pick up from other guys. But the one consistency thing that I would talk about with the switch hitters is stay consistent with your approach, and certainly stay consistent with your repetition. That's really the key for the young hitters more than anything, is that just make sure that however many swings you take left-handed, you take right-handed, because you do have to work on both of them, and you have to continue to develop both sides.
What about, I know for the parents out there that have to, fade the cross, what about bats? Do you know switch hitters who use maybe not a different model, but maybe a different weight?
Absolutely.
Is that something?
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, that, you kind of have to start deciding those things for yourself. I mean, very few players that I knew, in fact, I can't think of one switch hitter off the top of my mind that used the same model bat from both sides of the plate. You feel differently, and you have a different personality on your right side than you tend to do on your left side. And so, if I remember this correctly, I'll use Chipper Jones again. Chipper used a bigger bat right-handed than he used left-handed. And of course, left-handed, he stayed a little bit closer to the plate. He was a little bit lower and used his lower half a little bit more. And of course, he was a tremendous left-handed hitter. Right-handed, he was more of a contact hitter. And I think as his career developed, he developed a little bit more power right-handed. But he used, if I remember correctly, used a bigger bat and a longer bat because he stood a little bit farther from the plate. But that was his perspective from the game, from the right-handed batter's box, which was a different perspective from the left-handed batter's box. Because remember this, as a switch hitter, you're always facing the opposite arm. So everything kind of feeds into you. And so and what I mean by that is, like, for me, I stood right on top of the plate against righties because I had very short arms and I needed to be able to cover the outside corner. So I had to teach myself to be really quick inside because I needed to stand right on top of the plate. Now, against lefties, didn't always work in my favor, but I of course, I was only on the left-handed batter's box. I didn't get the ability to switch over to the other side. But even understanding that, I still had to make adjustments. I had a different approach against lefties than I did against righties. Righties, I was free and clear, felt like I could do anything. And when I was on my game, I felt like there wasn't a fastball you could get by me. And that's the way that my mind worked against righties, or excuse me, against lefties. I looked for more sliders because that's truly what I got. And so I needed to understand that. And so it was about letting the ball travel, trying to really guard the outside part of the plate a little bit longer and let the ball get a little bit deeper, and then fighting off pitches on the inside part of the plate, maybe just a little bit more, because I knew I was trying to let the ball travel. So, again, understanding all of those things, the freedom that you have as a switch hitter is that you get the opposite arm. So it's a great position to be in, but you have to work at it. And the approach is going to be similar. Most pitchers will take a similar approach because, of course, you're going to the other side and you get to have that view. You're not always worrying about sliders away, like, lefty matchups. We talk about it all the time. You feel like you're, sometimes dead in the water because the guy's throwing you a nasty slider, and I'm having a hard time keeping my front shoulder in and not wanting to dive out over the plate and having to attack a pitch that he's going to continue to throw. So as a switch hitter, you don't have to worry about those things.
No, it's great advice and a great way to kind of wrap up this episode of Hitting with Holly. Again, it's we appreciate everyone tuning in, and we hope you guys are getting something out of this. And we're going to keep bringing it to you. Like I said, we just ask if you please like, subscribe. We want to grow this channel, and we're here for you. Again, comments, if you have anything specific you want to ask us, put it in the comment section below once on these videos. And we hope everyone's following the channel and everyone's tuning in and everyone playing. Enjoy it, right? Everyone have a great time doing it. With that, we'll probably be back next week. We'll talk about a lot. Obviously, we got tournaments, All-Star game, second half of the season getting to go, and we're going to get into football season as well as we go with this. Holly, thanks again, my friend.
Love it, Joe. Yeah, great to be with you as always, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Okay, with that, we're signing out, and thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next video.